I've been having a bit of a think, and yes, it did hurt. But in all seriousness, I've been having a bit of a ponder about what are Canon going to do with their future mirrorless lineups. Canon have put themselves in a bit of a sticky situation with their mirrorless lineup, and currently there's a couple of different options that they've got for moving forward in the future, and nobody knows what Canon are going to do. Nobody knows if Canon knows what they're going to do. It's all up in the air at the minute. Everyone's speculating left, right, and center, and in this video, I just want to kind of lay the cards out on the table as to what the position is, what possible solutions that I can think of that they've got, but what I think they might go ahead and do. I'm talking about Canon's current situation with their mirrorless mount lineup. Because Canon, Sony, and Nikon have all transitioned from DSLR mounts to mirrorless mounts, but they've all gone about it in a slightly different way. Because a few years ago, we had Sony with the A-mount SLT cameras, Canon with the EF mount DSLRs, and then Nikon with the F mount DSLRs. And gradually, all three of them have transitioned into the mirrorless market. Now, Sony did this by switching to the E-mount and making an aps-c mirrorless camera. Canon made an aps-c mirrorless camera in 2012 with an EF M mount, and Nikon produced the J series cameras. I'm pretty sure they were called the J mount camera as well. Now, Nikon's J mount kind of floundered, it fell on its arse. Nikon, a couple of years ago, just discontinued the whole thing. So last year when they released the Z6 and Z7 cameras, which were full frame mirrorless cameras, they started a complete fresh with the Z mount. Sony fared a bit better with their aps-c cameras. So when they decided to release a full frame camera, they opted to stick with the E-mount. For it did give the advantage that in much the same way as DSLR lineups with aps-c and full frame, there were full frame lenses available that you could use on your aps-c cameras, and then if you wanted to change to a full frame camera, you only had to change the body from an aps-c to a full frame and continue using your lenses. Canon have kind of ended up in between the two of these because they've still got their EF-M lineup, and to all intents and purposes, they're still continuing to expand the EF-M lineup. However, when they released the full frame camera, the EOS R, they didn't opt to continue using the EF-M mount. They instead decided to create a new bigger mount the same way that Nikon did with the Z mount. So they have released the RF mount for full frame. This presents a bit of a tactical conundrum for the future. Currently, they've all got the fallback of DSLRs, so you can adapt the DSLR lenses to either mirrorless system, aps-c or full frame. However, I don't think anybody can deny that in the future, DSLRs are going to fade away in favor of mirrorless in the same way that film faded away in favor of digital. I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next year or two. It could be a few years down the line, but I think it's an inevitable thing that is going to happen. So what are Canon going to do further down the road? If you take it as a given that DSLRs are going to fade away, then it makes sense that the DSLR lenses would fade away. So gradually, EF lenses are going to fade out and become the vintage lenses that the FD mount currently is. So what if Canon stick with EF-M as aps-c and RF at full frame? Well, are you right now somebody who's shooting with a full frame camera? Because I am, and I guarantee pretty much everybody is in the same boat as me, that when you started out, you did not buy a full frame as your first camera. Likelihood is you bought an aps-c camera and you worked your way up to a full frame. Because as you were investing in the system, you could buy full frame compatible lenses for your aps-c body. So when you then transition to a full frame body, you only need to replace the body, not the lenses as well. If Canon stick with that two-tier system of EF-M for aps-c and RF for full frame, if you're somebody who's worked your way up through the EF-M lineup, let's say you bought an M50 to begin with, you progress to the hypothetical M5 Mark II that may or may not ever come out, and you maybe bought a couple of the EF-M lenses as well. So you've got yourself a nice little bundled system. And you then decide that you want to switch to full frame. You now not only need to sell your camera body, but you also need to replace all of the lenses as well. So that's a hell of a lot of money to put down on a camera body and a full range of lenses to upgrade from aps-c to full frame. which I think would put a lot of people off buying into full frame anyway because of the extra cost, but also then leaves Canon in the tricky situation that brand loyalty can potentially go out of the window if you're forcing them to sell everything they've got. So many people right now say that they wouldn't switch to another brand of camera because they're invested in one system's lenses. So if you're telling somebody that they have to sell all of the gear anyway, what's to stop them moving to a different manufacturer? Which means Canon would have to remain at the top of the game at all times. So that maybe doesn't seem like the best situation. Now, a few people have suggested that maybe Canon are just going to let the EF-M series die off and just switch wholeheartedly to RF. I mean, Canon don't seem particularly invested in the EF-M lineup at the moment. That EF-M system has been on the market since October 2012, so over 6 years now. And currently there are only 7 lenses in the lineup. And of the lenses that they brought out, there's only 2 fast aperture lenses. You've got the 22mm f2 prime and you've got the 32mm f1.4. Other than that, the rest of them are fairly slow lenses. You've got a 28mm f3.5 macro, you've got the 11 to 22, the 15 to 45, the 18 to 55, the 18 to 150 and the 55 to 200, all of which are like f4 to f5.6 or f6.3. So doesn't seem like Canon are overly interested in pushing the EF-M lenses. However, in about the past 6 months, really since they've released the EOS R, most of the patents that I've seen Canon release have been RF lenses, which makes logical sense. But I've seen more patents for EF-M lenses than I have for EF lenses, which suggests they're more interested in continuing the EF-M long term than they are their DSLRs. Also, even though there's not a huge selection to choose from in terms of cameras and lenses in the EF-M system, they actually sell extremely well, particularly I believe in the Asian market. So I think Canon would be reluctant to ditch the EF-M lineup and just go solely RF because there's presumably still quite a big consumer base out there. So what about the possibility that they keep the EF-M system as a very small niche system solely for people who want a travel-friendly camera system, and then expand the RF system to be an entirely new lineup to basically replace their DSLRs? This, again, is another potential possibility with a few trip-ups along the way, because I think if they were going to replace the entire DSLR lineup with an RF cameras, you would in theory also have to have entry-level aps-c cameras to replace the Rebel cameras. Where I think this idea falls down is that currently every patent that I've seen Canon file for RF lenses appear to have been full frame lenses. There's no aps-c lenses on the way. The vast majority of people who buy into those lower end DSLR cameras are never likely to invest out of those low end cameras. They'll generally stick with the low end cheap cameras. They won't push out into the 80D, the 7D, or into the full frame market. You could obviously argue that if the low end cameras are using an RF mount, then they could use the RF lenses that Canon are producing. The problem with that is that all of the lenses that Canon are seemingly producing for RF, the patents that they're filing, all look to be high-end L-series kind of lenses that are going to cost an absolute fortune and are going to be big and heavy. And realistically, nobody's going to buy an entry-level camera as your first camera and then want to sink £2,000 on pro-level lenses. It just doesn't make sense. So if Canon were going to do that, they would need some low-end RF lenses, and there's no sign of that currently. I think we might see the 7D series DSLR transition into an aps-c RF camera. Because apparently, and again, this is a rumor at the moment, but it looks pretty sure that Sony are about to release what they're dubbing as the A7000, essentially an aps-c A9. They've just released the A6400, which is supposedly the world's fastest mirrorless autofocus, coupled with 11 frames a second shooting, and that's supposed to be a mid-range camera. Sony have already made it clear in interviews that they're interested in investing in aps-c E-mount cameras, so logic would say that they're going to have something like an A7000 coming up soon, which the talk is A9 style camera body, capable of shooting 20 frames a second. Couple that with this ultra fast autofocus that they're bringing out as well. That would essentially make it a direct rival to the 7D and the Nikon D500. Now, if Canon and Nikon have accepted that DSLRs are going to kind of fade away, they can't really use the 7D and D500 to combat an A7000 and then its subsequent successors for all that long. They would need to bring out a mirrorless equivalent to the 7D and the D500. Now, Canon in essence could produce a 7D EF M camera, except the majority of 7D users that I see and talk to are generally using full frame cameras because most people buy the 7D because they're shooting sports and wildlife. It's a budget friendly sports and wildlife camera. That's what made it so popular in the first place. But inherently sports and wildlife photographers want, you know, long focal length lenses, maybe fast aperture lenses as well. So things like the 70-200, 300mm f2.8 are the ideal lenses to couple with the 7D camera. If Canon produced an EFM version of the 7D, they don't have any long lenses that would suit it. The longest lens they've currently got is a 55-200, and at 200mm you're shooting at f6.3. Not exactly sports and wildlife friendly lens, is it? So I can't see them making fast telephoto EFM lenses just to fulfill that one camera, especially considering there's going to be huge demand for those kind of lenses in RF mount cameras as well. So I think we will see a 70-200 2.8, maybe a 300mm f2.8. I think we will see those sort of popular DSLR lenses come out in RF mounts in the coming years. So I think if they're going to want to hold on to that area of the market that is the low budget sports and wildlife shooters that are currently invested in 7D cameras into the future, they're going to need to come up with a mirrorless equivalent to combat it. And I don't think it's going to work in an EFM series. So I think what Canon would do would be have full frame cameras as an RF and have the mid to high end APS-Cs, you know, like a mirrorless 80D and 7D Mark II equivalents as RF cameras, and then the low end Rebel cameras as EFM. It would still present the problem that you would have to transition from having EFM kit into RF. However, it would make more sense to have that jump lower down the line. So the most of the people who are going to buy into the EFM system and stay with the EFM system are staying at the low end of the market. And then the people who are going to take it more as a serious hobby or a profession would transfer to an RF system, but they're going to do it a lot sooner. They're not going to spend an absolute fortune on the EFM system before they have to sell it all. But those are just my thoughts and opinions based off pretty much no evidence whatsoever. But what do you make of Canon's current situation? What do you think their future plans are going to be? Do you think they'll scrap the EFM and just go solely RF? Do you think they'll run both mounts simultaneously? Or do you think they'll put a transition point somewhere in the lineup, and where would you put that crossover between the two systems? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.